Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back from another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have police visit over You Lack Values postcard sparks First Amendment debate from Yahoo.com, posted by LegioX, and that looks like a story from the Palm Beach Post being hosted on Yahoo. Police visit over You Lack Values postcard sparks First Amendment debate. And yeah, personally, I don't think the police should be visiting anyone's home over what they post or send out in the mail and post as postcards. But ultimately, the state has the ability to justify using its force for whatever reason it wants to justify, and that's true regardless of whatever branch of the uniparty is in power. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for this, but I don't really care how back during the Biden administration, the police went after a guy for posting threats against Biden on Facebook, and then he pulled a gun on them, and then so the police shot and killed him. That just goes to show you, Reddit's always fine with stuff like this when it's against the out group, but when it ever happens to the in group, suddenly it's the worst thing ever. And I'm sure that if it was if a Democrat was in office currently and the same thing happened, maybe the message on the postcard might have been a little different. Reddit would be completely fine with this, but since the out group's in power currently, it's the worst thing ever. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have former GOP election official buys Dominion voting system, says he'll push for paper ballots from CNN.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added Scott Leyendiker, the founder of a Missouri-based election technology company who previously served as the Republican director for the St. Louis City Board of Elections, purchased the company this week for an undisclosed sum according to a press release. As of today, Dominion is gone. Liberty Vote assumes full ownership of operational control, the press release reads. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. I know Dominion voting systems has been in the in-group for years when it comes to Reddit, but now it sounds like there's something going to be in the out-group, and Reddit will go start sounding like Trump did in 2020 when they're going on about, election integrity and all that. It's interesting. A lot of people on the right say, oh, when they lose an election, they'll say, oh, it's because we didn't have enough election integrity. Well, a lot of people on the left, when they'll lose an election, they'll say, oh, it's because of voter suppression. Well, in reality, at both sides are going to say that any election that they lost is illegitimate. They only say it's safe and secure if they won. But if it's like the Democrats after 2020, they said, oh, our elections are safe and secure, but after 2024, they said, oh, Elon and Trump used SpaceX to hack the votes. And yeah, personally, I don't really care. It just goes to show you, personally, I think the only way out of this is either open ballot, so, to make every vote open until it can be tied to a person, and people don't cast their vote in secret. I think that's probably the best way if we do have to do democracy, or B, just get rid of democracy altogether. I think the libertarian perspective on that is, democracy is forced collectivism. What we need is voluntary collectivism. If people want to be part of organizations that have votes and want to accept those votes, that's fine. But if you're in a country and you have to accept the country's government, but based on whatever the vote is, that's not very libertarian. Libertarian perspective is, voluntary collectives, not forced collectives. And all countries right now are, to some extent, I would say, are forced collectives. So I think that's very much the libertarian position. Get rid of democracy and you shouldn't have other people making decisions for you about who your leader should be. That should be your decision. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump's GOP spending taxpayer dollars to fund the regime's bribers military base put in the U.S., posted by CH4Locks, and that's crosswords from the Midas Touch subreddit. What the fuck, Eagle? But also released the unredacted Epstein files now. And that looks like a post from Iron Rupar, who tweeted, Hexif, I'm also proud that today we're signing a letter of acceptance to build a Qatari Emiri Air Force facility at the Mountain Home Air Base in Idaho. And then it looks like this is a clip of him saying that on Fox News. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Qatar, and I definitely do think you could make the argument it has some influence on the U.S. government with how they're going to build a Qatari Air Force base in Idaho. But, I definitely think Qatar is currently being used as a way to deflect from Israel and its control over President Trump. I definitely do think Qatar and has control over, might have some influence over President Trump. they did give him that jet after all. But regardless, I definitely think Israel's probably the bigger problem, with IPAC being probably the biggest foreign government lobby in DC. But regardless, just because Israel's probably more prevalent and has more influence doesn't mean Qatar has no influence. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's being used as a way to distract and deflect from Qatar's being used as a way to distract and deflect from Israel, and Reddit's taking the bait because Reddit always takes the bait whenever the Orange Man is involved. Next we have We're Fucked, and that's posted by Ragnarok XP, and that's the crossroads from the Something's Wrong 2024 subreddit. New Qatari Air Force facility built in Idaho, Kegsif announces, and that's an article from Time, I guess, about that. And yeah, personally, as I said, I don't really care that they're building a Qatari Air Force based in Idaho, but the U.S. has its Air Force bases and other military bases in all other countries around the globe, and I don't care for that either. Personally, I think, as I said, this is just a way to distract from Israel, and because, currently they're trying to push, Trump's a Qatari asset, like they pushed Trump's a Russian asset for years, well, in reality, Trump is much more an Israeli asset than either a Qatari asset or a Russian asset, and arguably he's probably much more of a DNC asset than any of those three, because he kind of goes out of his way to make himself look bad and make the DNC look good by comparison. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Republican representative claims everyone at No King's protest is a terrorist from NewRepublic.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that kind of rhetoric, but it's kind of like how a lot of people on the left say, anyone who dissents from our narratives at all or is a Nazi, fascist, Hitler, etc., etc. If you want to label anyone who dissents at all as that's fine, just like labeling them as a terrorist. But just because you say that doesn't necessarily make it true. And yeah, if you want to, ultimately, I think Reddit, that they do this a lot more than a lot of Republicans do. I would say labeling anyone in the Senate at all as fascist, Hitler, Nazi, etc., etc. But when it gets used against them, suddenly it's the worst thing ever, and that's just very much how Reddit works. When the in-group does something to the out-group, it's entirely justified and good, but when the out-group does the exact same thing back, it's literally the worst thing ever. And that just goes to show you how these people have no values, only teams. Next we have Trump. Obama got a prize for doing nothing. Obama got a prize. He didn't even know what he got it. He got elected, and they gave it to Obama for doing absolutely nothing but destroying our country. He was not a good president. Posted by Donald Key, and that's crosswords from the Boomers Being Fools subreddit. And I would agree with Trump there. I don't always agree with Trump, but what they say, a broken clock is right twice a day. Obama really didn't deserve his Nobel Peace Prize at all. He got it for not being George W. Bush. They gave it to him like a couple weeks after he was inaugurated, I think. And yeah, I definitely would agree that he didn't deserve it. But that being said, and I also agree that he wasn't a good president, but that being said, Donald Trump really isn't that good a president either. Maybe he deserved this Nobel Peace Prize more than Obama did in 2009, but that, to be fair, is a very low bar to clear. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Fear of the Boom and Bust, Keynes versus Hayek, the original economics rap battle, posted by some Harley77, and that's a crosspost from the Austrian economic subreddit, and it's a video from Radical Discourse. And yeah, personally, I would say I agree with Hayek more than Keynes. I think Keynes is probably one of the worst people in history who hasn't been completely invalidated yet, because he wanted more government control over money. I like Hayek. I remember we had books from Hayek. We had a book from Hayek we were giving out at a local community festival recently at the Libertarian Party booth. And yeah, I definitely would agree that his take that we need less government control over the economy and more individual control over the economy is something that very much should be the libertarian ethos. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Nobel Peace Prize winner, do not be seduced. Socialism is the sexiest path to losing your freedom. Hosted by Lemon Limelight, and they said, Jakubowicz interviews Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado for the Free Press. On Friday in Oslo, Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Machado, who has been hiding every year since last year's fraudulent elections, is widely regarded as the force keeping the country's opposition alive in the face of Nicolas Maduro's increasingly authoritarian regime. MCM, even though Venezuelans have nothing but socialism, we strongly want to live in an open society that respects private initiative and property, where no one begs the state for crumbs, but lives proudly from their work. JJ, you mentioned socialism. Believe it or not, there's a generation of Americans today who are flirting with socialism, and when Venezuela is raised as a warning, they say, that wasn't real socialism, are they wrong? MCM, 26 years ago, Venezuelan youth fell in love with socialist and Hugo Chavez. What people pointed to Cuba as a warning, they said Venezuela is not Cuban, Cuba is not real socialism, but here we are, worse than Cuba. Socialism always follows the same pattern. It elevates the state above the citizen, strips away your autonomy, your conscience, your dignity, your ability to choose, and it does so with a seductive lie. It whispers of equality, but the only equality it delivers is at the bottom, where everyone is dragged down together. This has been the case in every nation, on every continent, every culture where it has been tried. The result is always the same: a gigantic state that crushes the people beneath it, and once it takes hold, it is terribly hard to remove. Only free societies, where the individual comes first, can nurture both liberty and the responsibility that sustains it, because freedom without responsibility decays, and responsibility without freedom is tyranny. But when merit becomes a path to rise, when effort and creativity are rewarded, then every citizen is called to succeed. The whole nation rises together. This is what we want for Venezuela, and it is why I say to the American people, do not be seduced. Socialism is the sexiest path to losing your freedom. Guard your freedom jealously, defend it fiercely, because freedom is not just an American promise, it's the hope of the world. And I would agree with that. A lot of Redditors like socialism because, they think, just because you exist, you should be entitled to all these resources. And yeah, personally, I think a lot of them might be well-intentioned, but socialism, every time it's been tried, it doesn't work. They might point to, the Nordic model, but the Nordic model is much more capitalist than it is socialist, despite how it's marketed as being a socialist success story. And yeah, despite what Reddit says, just because socialism sounds good in theory doesn't mean it works. If something sounds good in theory, it needs to work in practice as well. And that's very much what you see when it comes to socialism and communism. When it comes to, communism in particular, it sounds like it's going to be perfect in theory, but in practice you get tyrants like Stalin and Mao, and socialism isn't much better than that, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, I think if you were going to wreck the economy by promoting tariff policies and other reckless policies that lead to the widespread job loss and the general increase in cost of living, at least have some relief program in place to help to your victims of those policies. The Unexpected Unemployed, posted by Historical Note at 6758, and they added, it's the least you can do. And I guess I would agree with that. Personally, I don't think tariffs are the right answer, but I don't think, relief programs are the right answer either. I think, rather than have tariffs, we shouldn't have tariffs. But, the relief programs aren't something that should be justified by the government either. I think, we need much more private relief programs than public relief programs. And that's very much the libertarian position, have the private sector do it rather than the public sector. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Where's the Lie, posted by Ragnarok XD, and that's a crossword from the Progressive HQ subreddit, and it looks like someone on TikTok at Bella Vandella who's saying, a chicken fry, something, like how, I don't care that small farmers of Arkansas are losing their farms, they're getting what they voted for. And yeah, personally, I don't think that's a very nice way to talk to people. The progressives increasingly, if you dissent at all from their narratives, they say you're getting what you're voted for. And, that's why I definitely think the Democratic Party is probably going to be in a worse position in 2028 and after Trump than it is currently during Trump, because the Democratic Party demonizes anyone who dissents at all from their narratives as someone who deserves to lose everything they have and be canceled entirely and wiped off the face of the earth. Like, look at Charlie Kirk, a lot of people on the left that thought his killing was completely justified and vocalized as such. A lot of writers would say, well, not the politicians, but, increasingly, you have to take everyone's word into account, and it might have been, it's clearly this is not some small fringe anymore where it's like, it's only a couple people. It seems to be a very much a big part of the Democrats' base at this point who want all dissent to disappear and will celebrate anyone who they consider to be in the outgroup staff if they feel like it. I'm not gonna say that, that's not gonna say that that doesn't happen on the right as well. Like, look at Paul Pelosi after he got attacked. But I definitely do think it's worse on the left currently, and that's why they're just a bunch of they're just a bunch of people who think that if you they say, oh, I'm so tolerant and accepting, I just want everyone to have free healthcare and free food and all that. But if you dissent at all from their narrative, they'll say, oh, you're a fascist, Nazi, Hitler bigot. I hope you die. And that just goes to show you that, they may claim to be these nice and accepting people, but they're really not. It's like, during Biden's term when Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, Democrats, members of their own party, went against what they wanted. They thought they were literally the worst thing ever. Same with John Fetterman. He's a Democrat, but Reddit thinks he's an ultra MAGA extremist, and it just goes to show you, you can even be in their party, and they'll still put you in the out group, and that's very much why I don't really care. That's probably one of the big reasons I left the Democratic Party. It's just all these purity tests, and if you dissent all from their narratives at all, suddenly you're the worst thing ever. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And let's see if there's anything new. Looks like there's nothing new. So I got some bonus posts today from the Libertarian Party Say subreddit. One of them I posted. I said, I linked to a video from JR Eclipse, UK arrest over social media post against mass immigration. And I added, case study and why not to give up your guns. And yeah, just because you can arrest people for what they post on social media doesn't mean you should. That's very much a lot of what the state does. They arrest people for just using their freedom of speech. And yeah, Reddit, of course, doesn't like that. Doesn't like when you bring up the UK because it's ruled by the in-group rather than the out-group currently. And it just goes to show you, Reddit will justify any government authoritarianism as long as the in-group does it rather than the out-group. And then there was another post that happened. U.S. citizen detained and held at ICE building in Portland for hours were released, the lawyer says, by Hazy Davy, 68. And that's a story from APnews.com. And I said, fuck ICE, just another bullshit free letter agency. And yeah, personally, a lot of fake libertarians simp for ICE, but I just think ICE is just another bullshit state law enforcement. I think the libertarian position is, law enforcement should be done by private individuals rather than public, just like pretty much for everything else. It's like J-Rig said in his political compass rap when he was liberal right. He says, if cops can be bought, then cops are great. They're only bad when they're used as tools of the state, and that's very much how the libertarian position is. If people want to do something because they're paid to, they should be able to. But, if they're forced to do so by the state, that's not very libertarian. Libertarians you can't, private corporations can be authoritarian as well, but, if you're not forced to join them, then they should be able to, then, that's on them. Plus, in the instance of a private corporation, they don't have the legal monopoly in use of force. The government has legal monopoly in use of force, and that's important to remember as well. So we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.